Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our workplace mental health webinar. My name is Ranjitha. I'm from the White Swan Foundation, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. I'd like to introduce our panelists to begin with. Monica Pillai. Monica has been a people development professional for the last 19 years. And in the last few years, she's been working extensively with organizations to help them develop a culture, practices, and policies for organizational growth and for well-being of employees. And in her current work, Monica ensures that conversations on mental well-being are a part of organizations' people mandate. We also have Dr. Sowmya Krishna, consultant psychiatrist, who's joining us. Dr. Sowmya has over 15 years of experience working both in India and in the UK. She specializes in working with adolescents and adults who are of working age. She helps clients manage common and complex mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and medically unexplained disorders. Dr. Sowmya believes in a collaborative approach when she works with clients and their families. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Dr. Sowmya, for joining us. We also have Tapasya, who's joining us today. Tapasya works for an NGO in Bangalore. She's a survivor of depression, and she'll be bringing in her own experience to share what workplaces can do to support people who have depression and anxiety. So thank you to all three of you for joining us. To everyone who's just joined in, we're talking about depression and anxiety at the workplace. And for the next 1 hour, we're going to be focusing on what do depression and anxiety look like, and do they actually look different in the workplace? What can the workplace community do to make the environment more inclusive towards people with depression and or anxiety? So we do have a set of questions that I will be asking our experts, but if there's something specific you'd like to know, I'd like you to put in your questions in the chat box. You can also send it to us anonymously if you'd prefer that. So thank you all. Once again, thank you, Dr. Sowmya, thank you, Monica, and thank you, Tapasya, for joining us. To begin with, I'd like to hear maybe a little bit from each of you. Let's start with Dr. Sowmya. Dr. Sowmya, why do you think we need to talk about mental health and about depression and anxiety in particular at the workplace?
So we were talking about why it's important to talk about mental health in the workplace, especially depression and anxiety. If you look at the recent WHO report, mental health is very, very common, irrespective of which country you're in across the world. So the lifetime prevalence of any mental disorder is 1 in 4. So which means that any one of us at some point is likely to have some sort of a mental health problem. What we also know from the various reports across different countries is that depression is the leading cause of disability, the second leading cause of disability across the world, which means that any disability is likely to cause a lot of financial and economic burden. So I feel it's very, very important we do talk about depression, because it alleviates a lot of society's problems as well. It helps in the overall well-being of the society as well. Hello? So
Yes, Dr. Sowmya. I think there's just the briefest of lags, and I'm hearing you a couple of seconds too late, but please continue.
Oh, okay. So I think the other thing you were asking, Ranjitha, is what does it look like in the workplace? So if you look at the symptoms of depression and anxiety, they are, lack of motivation, low mood, feeling very tearful, feeling irritable, not being able to sleep, not being able to eat, just a general disinterest in things as well. So if you were to think about what someone with depression may present like in work, it may be that somebody is not very active. Somebody who's previously been very engaged in all the processes at work suddenly feels very disengaged, very detached, seems very isolated. So if you've got a colleague at work who's usually wanting to go out for dinners and parties, and all of a sudden, every time you mention a meal, they back out, that's a sign, something going on there. So often it's a change in one's personality. Mood changes are very common and is often noticed around them. So you may notice that somebody suddenly becomes snappy. So not everybody who's depressed or anxious is going to look sad. Some of them may seem very snappy or irritable. Some of them you may notice just tear up without any reason. So they may appear sad or sullen. The other thing that often people complain about in workplace is a sense of indecisiveness. Somebody who's been very confident, who's been able to make decisions, is suddenly checking out every little detail with a colleague or with your boss, seeking reassurance constantly because they don't have the confidence to make that decision. So that's another common thing that we notice in workplace. And depression, wrecks our sleep-wake cycle. So sometimes people with depression aren't able to sleep on time, which means they're waking up quite late, or they're waking up feeling very groggy and tired. So you may notice that they're not turning up to work on time, or they're coming very late, they're looking very tired, they're dozing off sometimes. The other thing, which is another significant thing, is physical appearance. So people are feeling tired in depression, they're not feeling very interested, so they're not interested in how they appear. So you may notice that somebody who's very particular about how they dress, very immaculate, suddenly, is turning up very disheveled. Sometimes it may be as subtle as, sometimes in females, it may be that they're not wearing makeup. It's as simple as that. But you may notice that, why is she suddenly looking so different? So these are very subtle changes that you may notice when somebody's presenting with depression or anxiety at work.
Yes, thank you. And we'll perhaps come back to this in a little while. In the meanwhile,
Okay.
I'd like to bring you in, Tapasya, on this. What, often the conversation we hear is around, it's no difficult from a physical health issue. But what is it about something like depression or anxiety that makes it different from other physical health issues, especially when it comes to work? Tapasya, you're muted.
Yeah. I was mute. So sorry. Thank you. So I would agree with what doctor said that, sudden there would be subtle change. Okay, you are on onset of think you're normal, you are absolutely okay. They, if you say that, no, I have some headache, or I'm not feeling up to the mood, or as she mentioned that, you want to, suddenly you are out of all parties, you suddenly are at the mention of any meal, you are disinterested, and you are very inactive suddenly. So all these are true. Plus,
So I'm guessing there's a bandwidth issue, and I'd like to move on to Monica and maybe bring in Tapasya in a little while. So Monica, as somebody who's in the... Please give us a couple of minutes to figure out. There seems to be some audio disturbance, and please give us a minute to figure that out. Yeah. Rashi, are we good to go now?
Yeah, I think we are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Monica, to bring in the perspective of somebody who works, in helping organizations address issues like this one, could you tell us a little bit about how the conversation around mental health itself has been maybe evolving over the last few years in organizations?
Sure, thank you. So very happy to be here, and also I'm very happy to talk about the fact that these conversations have value. So in the last 3 or 4 years alone, I've seen a large number of organizations go from saying that mental health, does that mean that you need a medical doctor only to help, and does that mean 4 or 5 illnesses, to talking about things like chronic stress as a real issue that organizations and people are facing. And these are conversations that people inside organizations, so HR folks are having these conversations, senior leaders are having these conversations, saying I have seen the impact um, of some of these challenges in my workforce, and we see a need to address it. So the number of those kind of conversations are significantly on the increase. So if I have to draw parallel, about 10-15 years back, not too many organizations in the country had, say, employee physical health initiatives. There wasn't an annual health check inside an office, right? Now it's almost the norm. Every large organization or every medium-sized organization, there's something or the other that happens, even if it's an annual sports tournament, and some tips that go out to employees saying what you need to do to have a physically healthy life. I think what we are witnessing right now is the same thing, but for the mental health space. Now, while it's happening, the revolution isn't visible as, oh, a revolution is ongoing, right? But its effect is kind of felt on the aftermath. So I think what we are going through right now is that groundswell in mental health conversation, mental health awareness. And these are the conversations that will go forward, that will become the foundation for a strong conversation or a strong platform that organizations build, using which they can have awareness, they can have practices that truly help all employees that need help.
Yeah, and I'd say, as just as we've begun implementing our own workplace mental health program, I'd agree with you in terms of there are more and more conversations happening. Perhaps it's not happening in a very visible manner, but it's true that they are happening, and that we're certainly walking towards creating more inclusion. Yeah. I want to come back to the question. I don't know if Tapasya is back, but I'd like to open it up to the two of you in terms of, there's a tendency to equate depression and anxiety with physical health and say, it's not very different from either of these. And yet there are some differences that make it harder for a person with depression or anxiety to be in the workplace and to function, perhaps the way they were before they were diagnosed. Could we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Question to me?
It's open to either of you. Monica,
okay,
please. Yeah.
Okay. So from the perspective of say how a manager or an HR person experiences it, the way they are looking at somebody struggling with anxiety or depression is, there's a sense of, I'm engaging with this person in my team, but nothing's working. So appreciation, engagement of any
I'm back in
of celebrations. So there's a sense of, from the outside looking in, it looks like everything in their life seems to be fine. Why are they upset? So on the other end of on the other side of the spectrum, if I'm somebody who's struggling with anxiety or depression, and I'm frequently asked, but there isn't a problem. So why, as compared to a fever or anything physical, where there are external physical manifestation, and there is like there are a series of medicines that I'm having or whatever. So here the questions I'm asked are, but you seem all right. Nothing seems to be on the face of it wrong with you, and you get kind of unhelpful suggestions like, why don't you just try to be happier? So to my mind, I think that's the tough part for people to genuinely come forward and talk about it, because there's a sense of, I won't be understood.
So I'm guessing the invisibility of mental health issues itself makes it harder for the workplace to actually recognize and respond to someone who's struggling.
Yeah.
I think Tapasya is back with us.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yes, Tapasya, we were talking about what can make it, there's a tendency to equate anxiety and depression with physical health issues and say, it's not very different from either of these. But what is it about anxiety and depression that can make it challenging for a person to function at the workplace?
Because there is a stigma attached to mental health, which is changing. I must acknowledge that. But there is always a stigma. They will say, oh, ye to pagal hai, isko kya pata? If you try to bring in that, no, I'm not feeling that great, or I'm low on energy, because we cannot actually take out, see, there is always a oneness of environment and self. If, just an example, what I'm trying to say is that if a body is not straight and somebody who has a hump tries to see a picture, I mean, his own shadow, his or her own shadow, and then says, why is this not straight? How can it be straight? Because your body is bent. So the shadow itself is also bent. same thing happens when you are mentally stressed. You start physically stressed out as well. Your body starts showing the manifestation, as doctor pointed out. You start getting the manifestations in your physical body as well, but which is very difficult to explain it to anyone at the workplace, because they try to shove it up. Like they will just say no, they'll brush it under the carpet. They'll say, oh, just take some medicine, you'll be okay. Why? What is the depression? What is the reason for your depression? You have everything. They will try to equate it to material things around you. Say for example, you have a car. Okay, so you have clothes to wear, you have food to eat. What are you depressed about? So that's where I'm coming from. That is how it is difficult to explain when you are having a mental issue.
Yeah. So Dr. Sowmya, I'd like to just, as a continuing from what Tapasya just shared, does it really come down to workplaces not being able to understand what depression and anxiety really are?
Yeah, and I think what Monica said rings true. So I have a lot of people who are struggling with depression. They're finding it very hard to talk about. And the few times when they've had the courage to talk to a colleague or a friendly person at work, when they feel judged, they just completely shut off. So there's definitely that, because it's not visible, it becomes much harder. And I wish sometimes, sometimes I wish there was a test that I could do and show people, yes, listen, this is just as, bad as, say, diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. It's because the chemical basis is just the same. And the other narrative that I always hear is, like what Tapasya was saying, everything's going good in your life. What's there to be depressed about? And sometimes I have to use analogies of people who've talked about depression, like when Deepika Padukone talked about her illness. She was at the peak of her career, so people from the outside were like, she ticked all the boxes. Why is she feeling the way she is? So often there may not be an overt trigger or an overt precipitating factor, but there may be something personal for that individual going through depression, which we may not know about. And I think that's the hard bit. It's not visible.
I want to come back to a question that we received from one of our participants. And the question was about how can I actually talk about my depression and anxiety at the workplace? And just to, kind of add on to that, you talked about how people find it hard to understand why somebody might experience depression because they seem to have it all. What is a way that, a conversation like this can be addressed?
One thing is, I think when you're looking at it, you have to think about a very general way of talking about mental health in the office space, which feels non-threatening, which has a very neutral tone. So if, as a group in the office, you talk about mental health in a neutral way and don't use very stigmatizing words, it becomes easier for people to start talking about anxiety and depression. And when somebody is talking about depression and anxiety, if you have a group of people who are just willing to listen and not offer suggestions or, say stuff like man up or shrug it off and things like that, it fosters further conversations as well. So I think it is a group thing, so if it can be part of like an induction or orientation program where you sensitize your staff team to how you talk about mental health. So just like, if you were to talk about somebody's going through cancer, people are very sensitive about how they talk about. So low mood and anxiety should be talked about in the same tone. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it, but it's the language we perhaps use.
Yeah. So it's about creating safe spaces and about sensitizing people to understand what this is about. Yeah. Monica, I'd like to come with you on this. What can organizations do to actually create those safe spaces and to sensitize their employees?
Sure. So, so I'm coming from a position of saying that organizations or individuals within don't start with the intention of of being less willing to understand. I think in these situations, empathy is genuinely not easy. It's like talking about, so if I had to give an analogy, if I said, think of a war zone, right? So I think of a movie where there was a war situation and I'm going to think of sound, smoke, guns, tanks, a bunch of things. But I can't really understand what somebody who's been in a war zone goes through. This is a little like that. if somebody says I didn't get promoted and I'm upset, I can immediately empathize with him because with that person, because I might have experienced that. A good friend of mine might have. It's easier. Yeah. So coming from that perspective, I think what organizations could do is just to train frontline managers, and this is so again, if I go back a little, maybe 5 years back, conversations around diversity and inclusion weren't so mainstream as they are now, right? So I think the same sort of rigor, the same sort of energy, focus, budgets need to be put aside for mental health conversations, for training managers, frontline managers who have people reporting into them, to get sensitized, to understand that these things happen, for them to understand the statistics that close to 50% or 60 or whatever that number is currently, of corporate India, urban India goes through this. So every other person in your team is possibly going through some sort of difficulty and not understanding that they are, and the fact that their performance is not dipping just possibly means they're, uh, uh, they're probably just showing higher resilience, but that does not mean there isn't an issue. So I think the single largest thing organizations can do, given that we are calling this a crisis at a national level, is that set aside budgets, train frontline managers, get them to understand the language, get them to understand the terms, and train them. And it's training. You'll need to kind of get them to go through a few experiences of saying, how do I listen without judging? How do I be present for that person? And for there to also be backup processes, systems that help the manager be able to do all this without there being an impact on their delivery.
And we'll thank you for saying that about systems. We'll come back to that in a little while.
Yeah.
Tapasya, as somebody with a lived experience of depression, what are some maybe signs in your immediate environment that you've seen and interpreted as, maybe it's okay for me to share about my experience here, or maybe it's not okay for me to share about my experience here?
So yeah, what I felt when I was going through all of this, my family made a lot of major impact because they took the lead in talking to my colleagues and also as my managers, that she's trying to break from the mold of this whole thing, depression. She's not able to talk to anyone, she's not able to reach out to anyone, so we would request you to please take care of her. She has some medications that she has to take regularly, and otherwise there would be a pattern where either I would not talk at all, I'll become very silent for spells of time, or I will talk too much and I will my words would topple over each other, like the rate of speech would be very, very high. So all these signs and symptoms, my mother and my father, they took that lead and spoke to everyone around. So as doctor pointed out, that you pointed out that you have to have safe spaces where you can actually, because in that state you are not able to judge. You feel that everyone is out there to get you or to shame you, and you yourself are so inside a cocoon that you don't want to talk to anyone, and you don't want to come out of whatever is happening. You just resign, you just think that no, I'm good for nothing. Your confidence level just shakes up, and because you're not able to do anything much, you feel you are not productive. So that safe space was given to me by my managers. I'm really thankful to those managers, and I'm still in touch with them. They gave me that space, and they started giving me smaller amount of work which they thought I could do. With that also, they would check, okay, are you able to do it? Is it too much for you? So small little things and appreciation every day, all that constantly happened. And they actually helped me to bring out of all that cocoon, and that the walls that I have built around me. And taking my medications on time was absolutely necessary, which I did. And slowly, steadily, that paved the way for me to get myself out of the space that I had been to. So that's how it helped me.
Thank you. And what I'm hearing is that you had a whole bunch of allies around you who were able to step in and offer you the support you needed at those moments. Which brings me back to my earlier question, Monica, about what can managers or the system do to ensure that they're allies to a person in the workplace who has either depression or anxiety?
Sure. Um, so it's a good place to start might just be to familiarize managers and colleagues, saying this is what reality, this is what it looks like on the ground. So here are a few things that you don't say, here are a few things that it's okay to say. What does it sound like to just show up for the person, as opposed to giving them unhelpful advice possibly? Yeah. So one part of it is awareness, and I think that's the single largest piece. Another area possibly also could be, for managers, for people who would like to be allies, to also, especially managers, to get out of. Quite often, I see managers coming from a place of saying either fear or guilt, saying, "Have I said anything? Is it because of me? Should I not have said that? Is it okay for me to give some sort of feedback?" And typically, an episode like this for a team member would also automatically mean that they're not bringing their 100% to office. So there would be a drop in productivity, or a bunch of deadlines could slip. So they are in that bind of saying, should I, shouldn't I, and if I do, what happens? So I think a great place to start for people to start being allies is to read up, is to ask for help, is to most organizations also typically have some sort of support system within the organization. So reach out to those people, and off late again, I'm hearing a lot of folks say that I went to somebody that is in the mental health space, and I asked them, saying, I have a feeling somebody in my team is struggling with something like this. They've either talked to me about it or they haven't, but this is the sense I have. So how should I support them? So I think an excellent question would be to ask, what can I do to support them, instead of telling oneself, I have a problem in my hands. So which is not something, as you said earlier, if it was a physical illness, our first response is not, oh, I have a problem in my hands. Our first response as colleagues would be to say, what can I do to support them? I would think just the same lens applied here is a great start. Add to that a layer of awareness, and I think we are significantly on our way to genuinely be allies to people.
Hello?
Ranjitha?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
In some technical disturbances, but we're back on now. Monica, you were talking about what it means to really understand and be aware. Yeah, you were talking about what managers can do to create a supportive atmosphere.
Yeah, so what I was saying was, step one, stop looking at it from a perspective of guilt, or worry or fear, saying I might do something that that will come back to me, as you said something, and that made it worse for the individual. To add to that, get awareness, talk to people, talk to mental health professionals, talk to folks that are available inside organizations, look online, so read, read where you think there's information available that's that well, to put it in simple terms, I suppose, that looks reliable. Yeah. And see if you can, so again, this comes down to skill, but if managers can get to a place with the individual where they're asking questions, saying, what can I do to support? As opposed to saying, oh, now you've created a problem for me and this is something that I need to solve, right? So just asking, is there something I can do to support, would get the other person to a place where they're able to admit, where they're able to be vulnerable with the manager and say, these are challenges I face. And that, I think, is a great starting point.
Dr. Sowmya, on that note of being aware and understanding the experience of a person with depression and anxiety, what are maybe a couple of things that you'd like managers or even others in the workplace to be aware of in terms of challenges that people with depression face?
Okay. I think the challenges are noticing, being mindful and aware that somebody who's going through a problem may not always talk about it. It may be that you notice changes. So it is how you address that. So, and I very much agree with what Monica was saying, that when you notice something, acknowledge that there is a problem. So if you notice a colleague looks sullen, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, you look different, something going on there. There's nothing wrong with asking. And if somebody opens up, it is about asking them what would be supportive for them. For one person, support may be just sounding off with you. For another person, it may be that they need to take some time off. So, and you'll only know that when you listen to them. And I think sometimes workplaces are not geared to listening, if you know what I mean. So if you're in a big multinational company or in any company, the desks are all open, there's no privacy. So it may be that the manager has to use their skill in kind of being very sensitive about how you talk about these things, where you talk about these things, and giving them time. So if somebody is depressed, and if your manager is constantly looking at the watch or looking at the computer, they're not going to be able to. So I'm not suggesting people do that, but there may be other pressures that managers got as well on their head. So I think it is time, giving people time. And it may be that sometimes it may be that you acknowledge and say, things don't look okay at this point, can we talk about it later? That tells the person, that'll help them contain their anxiety, that they've got a space where they can sound off with the manager. So acknowledging things, not assuming what's going on with them, is another thing. So it may be that at some point an employee has told you that they've had some trouble in the past. I think it's important to keep an open mind. It may be a different thing that's upsetting them now. So if not being judgmental, having a very curious stance is always helpful from a manager's point of view. Sometimes managers have to be flexible. So if you've got a good employee in front of you, but because of depression or because of medication, they're not able to get to work at a certain time, it's offering flexibility, but in a very time limited manner, not leaving it open ended. So it may be that you say, actually, it looks like your mornings are hard for you now. How about you start work at around 11 or 12, and we'll review this in about 2 weeks time. Again, without putting that pressure, because sometimes you can put the 2 weeks can be said in a different way. If you emphasize on the 2 weeks, it becomes another deadline, which might add anxiety. So it's how you say things as well. So it's having that flexible stance as well from manager's point of view, because what work is important. The other thing is, of course, also sometimes not giving people work will add to their loss of self and worsen their lack of confidence. So as a manager, what is needed. Your employee better than anyone else. So what they are capable of. So give them something that they're able to do. So there's a lot of emphasis these days on errorless learning, that the mind always remembers things that we've done well. So maybe give the employee, however simple it is, give them something that they're able to do rather than something complex. But build on that is what I would say. But this would mean a lot of one-to-one time. So it is very dependent on the manager knowing their employee.
We've got a question from Rishi. Rishi asks, if a manager is unable to handle depression, at what time is a professional psychologist or even a psychiatrist to be involved? What is the appropriate time to bring in someone and say, you know what, I think we need someone else's help, somebody who's trained in this to help us navigate this?
Okay. So if you've got somebody in front of you, the one thing that I know is just something that should ring your alarm bell straight away, is any risk associated. We know that people who have any mental health problems are more prone to ending their life, committing suicide. So often people with depression will have thoughts of suicide, either fleeting or persistent. So if you've got an employee sat there saying, I don't think I want to live, or they've said they've tried to do something to hurt themselves, that would be that's when I would start having a conversation about them seeking professional help. But also, if you've got somebody who's very efficient, suddenly is struggling with everything, breaking down very often, that may be another time when you say you need to seek professional help.
So it's about noticing uncharacteristic changes in behavior that last for a while.
Yeah.
And
any
possibly
risks.
harm to self. Yeah.
Yeah. And also with some employees, it may be that the risks may not necessarily be suicide or self-harm. It may be that you see that they're using alcohol or substances, which is what a lot of people do. They try to self-medicate or try to cope with it by using things. So if you notice that an employee, or you may hear from your team that, we went out at this party and he started drinking more than usual, or she started drinking more than usual. And that may be a conversation as well, in a very subtle way, to say, do you want to see somebody?
Yeah. Monica, coming to you, what's a way of having this conversation, in a way that really implies that this is being done with a sense of support and not really, we talked about the tone in which this conversation can be held, and it's so important. The tone itself is so important. How does one do that?
Yeah. So as far as the tone of the conversation goes, I would say if the person having the conversation with the team member gives the team member a sense of A, time, and B, the fact that I'm here to support you, and therefore if you want to talk to me today, again tomorrow, again a few days later, that's fine, because one of the challenges that managers typically also face is they'll say schedule something into my calendar and then so kind of removing some of those barriers and telling the person that if there is a sense of immediacy that you want to talk at some point, feel free to do that. So some of the standard rules in a manager's mind have to relax a little bit for the team member to feel comfortable. So that's between the manager and the team member to say, to look at what those could be. But those are little ways in which a manager can create a sense of comfort. In addition, again, these are small things that really have a powerful impact. Not talking about work. Yeah, so not saying that, all right, so we are having a conversation about work, but I'll also ask you, how are you doing? Yeah, so say that this is not necessarily about work. Bring in data saying these are the things that I'm seeing changing in you. That's the reason I'm having this concern that maybe not all is well. So give them time to think about it, process it, come back, maybe talk about it. Or if the employee's been able to figure out that it's something is off, but it's not got anything to do with work, then is there somebody else they can talk to? And for the manager to also realize that I'm not alone in trying to solve this problem. I have support. Yeah. So, and again, when it comes to, and one of the primary challenges the manager is also going to face is to say, if all of this is happening, then there is some amount of, so the parallel processing that the manager is also doing is, but what about my delivery? What about timelines that are slipping, etc. So, so address that upfront right in the beginning. Say that maybe we, tone down some of your deliverables. Maybe we set slightly different goals. What does that mean for you in the next 6-8 months? But, focus on this, get this out, and then let's look at, prioritize. This is your health. It's important. And very often in these kind of conversations, the biggest disagreement can come from the team member themselves, especially if it's something where the managers notice something and the team members not necessarily gotten there. So it's important to genuinely go in saying, I'm concerned about this person and I'm worried about, and not necessarily say, I'll try this out. If it doesn't work, I'll see if I can move them to another team or another geography. But to say that, this is a concern that's on my hands right now and I need to really, really engage with it. So I'm sure for whoever wants to support that person, going to be also an emotionally taxing time as somebody who wants to provide support to be there for that team member. So I think they should go in prepared for that time, for that effort, for that energy and emotional investment in that.
And something I'm picking up from what you shared is that it's so important for the conversation to be led by the person who's struggling themselves, especially with respect to the pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tapasya, if I could ask you, is there a particular conversation you remember having with somebody in one of your workplaces that gave you a sense of, wow, this person's really got my back. They care about me. And this is why, yeah.
Yes, as I mentioned, I had managers who could take care of the problems because they were informed earlier that because they came to know later. By the time I had a major breakdown, and then my family took over the whole thing, and that's when they came to know that okay, we need to deal with her in a very different way. So they started giving me something which I can sit down and just do it instead of a team, because they thought that first, let me cope up with my own feelings, and then when I am able to, and when I'm okay to interact with others in the team, then slowly that was a process which was very subtle, and it was very very organic. There was no sudden changes in that. And when I started dealing with things and I started to cope up with my emotions on my own, then slowly one person added in, like I got into team where okay, two people have to work together, then slowly three, like that, and then later introduced to a larger team. So it was very subtle but slow. They didn't put any pressure on me, that, and this is how I knew something, that okay, I can always bank upon my managers. There were one or two colleagues who would always make fun, oh, she's very slow, oh, she would not know how to do it. And at later part sometime they will say comments like, oh, she's very aggressive, so just leave it, or she'll fight with us, or something like that. Those comments would keep coming in. But later on all that changed, and also they knew that okay, I'm contributing towards the whole thing, and I am a good uh, a productive employee, and just a little breakdown will not change the things. And as doctor pointed out, that I should keep doing things. My brain always remembers what good things we can do. So that's how I think I could manage, and those people had my back. So that's to what I felt when I was going through all of this.
And and as a survivor, what does having this kind of support do to your ability to be present and perform at your role?
It was extremely difficult, because just to get up and show up in the office also was a big chore for me. I would just want to be in the bed, not talk to anyone, just sleep whole day long, because sometimes taking those drugs, Elprex and all, also makes you like, you don't want to get up. You just want to, wherever you are, you just feel okay, I'm comfortable. I don't want to get out of my bed. I just want to whole day long. I just want to sleep or just keep reading books, just cry for nothing because I'm not feeling well. All that feelings will keep creeping up to you. So that's how it was. And mm, it was very difficult to even get up from the bed. But I had to, and my family, as I think Dr. Sowmya pointed out, that you should have somebody who can say, okay, fine, let's look at this. Maybe if you cannot start work at sharp 9, let's say you can start at 10:30. What time is convenient for you to come? So all that happened with me. All that what doctors pointing out, all that has happened with me. And yes, then slowly and steadily, as a survivor, I can say that yes, a lot of gentle pushing with time bound outcome that you're looking for, all that helps, all that worked for me.
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to just take a minute to say, if there's anyone who's on the webinar right now who'd like to ask your questions, please do so. We have a question from a participant who wants to know, how do I cope with the fatigue that I experience due to depression, and how can I stay productive?
Okay.
Dr. Sowmya?
Yeah. Fatigue is a very common thing in depression. And that is what a lot of people struggle with, because it affects your functioning. It affects how you get on with your day-to-day activities, get to work, and things like that. What we know is the way to manage fatigue is, of course, if it's very severe, you have to look at medication. But the other thing that definitely helps fatigue is activity. So the physical activity is a way to beat fatigue. So that is physical fatigue. But I also know that people with depression struggle with emotional exhaustion, because their mind is so active that at the end of it, they just feel exhausted. They can't do anything. They can't focus on what they have to do. So what helps is to have small goals set on a day-to-day basis that you set ahead of time. So for instance, you decide tomorrow I'm going to maybe work on the introduction of a certain report rather than saying I'm going to do the whole report. Being very specific, keeping very small goals. And the advantage of this is when you wake up in the morning, as a lot of people with depression will agree with, mornings are very hard. You know, as it is, it's very hard to think about what the whole day is going to look like. It's very overwhelming. So if you've already planned something ahead of time, you wake up, and although you're feeling exhausted, at least you know what you want to focus on. You know that you have to eat breakfast at 9 o'clock. You know that you have to go to work at 11. You know you have to go and work out at a certain time. So that itself takes the pressure away and reduces the exhaustion a little bit. And this is called, you know, behavioral activation, if you look at the scientific term. So it's basically a very fancy way of saying, you know, you have a structure in your day when you're feeling like this, and make sure you do something that keeps you physically active, and also do something that gives you your time, like, you know, something that would chill you. And it may be just 5 minutes, it may be 10 minutes. See, the other thing that people with depression will do is they'll set goals that are unrealistic sometimes. If you know you've been feeling tired, don't think of an hour-long workout. You're not going to be able to do it. 10 minutes is significant. So keeping it small and doable.
Small and doable, yeah. So Monica, knowing if for managers who know that maybe they have somebody on the team who's experiencing depression or anxiety and are likely to experience fatigue, how can they kind of take this into account while planning how they work together? What is it that they can actually do to kind of address or consider this?
Sure. Starting from if you have to say, just look at the workload that they have, and is it possible for the manager to say, redistribute it, and do that with anybody else who's relevant to the conversation, as Dr. Sowmya said, realistic goals. So if you're able to kind of have a conversation with the person who's struggling and say that we're going to reduce some of the effort that you need to put in, so that I'm able to show you success. Yeah, and I understand that that's something that you need to see for you to be able to get over this. Get an okay from them, check in more frequent milestones than you would for the person, if they were feeling otherwise all right. So realistic goals, more frequent check-ins, see if they need help. All of those things would help them, would help them feel supported, feel like maybe this reduces the expectation on me. And if they also keep checking on their energy levels. So if I have to just quickly add share my own example. A few years back, I had a viral arthritis attack, which means that my joints kind of swell up if I do anything, even if I don't do anything. Weather like rainy season, it just gets really bad. So as an impact of that, I couldn't lead a physically active lifestyle, and that reduced my energy levels. And I'd find between the pain itself as well as the emotional pressure I was putting on myself, just find it really difficult to, as others were saying, find it difficult to get out of bed. So I had a conversation with my manager saying this is the challenge I'm facing, and I got a blanket okay from him to say that for the next 6 months, if there are meetings that happen before 10 a.m., if I come in, and it's personally very important for me to be on time for meetings, so I told him that please don't either make a joke of it, or please don't think of it as me not being motivated. I'm just not able to. And I had support from not just him, but another 7 or 8 people to whom I had this conversation with, and well beyond the 6 months. So, people just kept checking in saying, are you all right? How are your energy levels today? And it's just such a huge support for people to, every 2 or 3 days, just keep checking on your energy levels. That itself is an energy, that's a source of increasing your own energy. So I think those are little things that managers could possibly do, which is well within their control, doesn't impact deliverables or doesn't impact work in a significant way. And it truly, truly helps the person come back to finding some sort of balance.
Tapasya, is there anything you'd like to add to this?
Tapasya's internet has dropped out.
Okay, thank
So
you.
she apologizes that she can't continue, but I think she can't join it again.
All right, thank you.
There's a question that's come to the White Swan account. The person asked that they are an introvert and they are facing depression because of their career issues, and they can now realize that they also have physical changes, including tiredness and body pain. Can physical exercise help? Because they're already going for therapy, I believe.
Would you like me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Hello? Yeah. Yes, definitely physical exercise would help. I think it would help with the overall sense of well-being. And I always tell people this: physical activity doesn't have to be what feels good for the doctor or the person in front of you. For some people, gymming is great. For some people, Pilates is great. For some people, a walk is good. A dance class is good. So you pick the physical activity that you would enjoy and go with it. And like I said earlier, it is about grading yourself. So start with the bare minimum that you can achieve. Start with 10 minutes a day, then build on to 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and go up to something that is sustainable. So so I would say to this person who's having therapy that physical activity would really help, because therapy is once a week. You have the rest of the week where you have your own time, you have to think about things, you have to fill your time. So I think it's helpful to have activities, and not just physical activity. Like I said, it may be other interests as well that you want to fill in. So this is usually a good time for people to think about what they want to do.
We've received another question where someone asks, is it fair to other employees if they're asked to take on extra workload because someone is struggling? And perhaps I'd like to add to this, if there has to be a redistribution of workload, what is really a way in which managers can communicate it so that it doesn't look unfair or arbitrary? Monica, if you'd like to take this.
Yeah. So we are, I think, experiencing a change in the way absence from the workplace is seen. Even now, there's prevalence. If I have to digress a little bit, even women coming back from maternity or going on maternity leave is considered, a problem. So people say that, oh, that's such an ill-timed, option for you to be off when a project is coming to completion, etc. So I think that's changing over time, but it is something that team members could feel is a reality for them, and say that, here I am, I'm already working 12, 14 hours, and then if this one person is not there, or they're there for a diminished period of time, it adds to my workload. The way for a manager to possibly address this question, and there are multiple ways. One that I can think of is to say that all of us go through unscheduled outages. There could be situations where I need to take care of somebody in my family. I could suddenly fall sick. Multiple things happen. And when that happens, other people do pick up the slack for me. Even if it's a simple cold and cough and that's, laid me low for a whole week and I'm not in the office, there are other people doing my work for me. Something like this is exactly that, possibly on a longer for a longer period of time. So the way for a manager to kind of start that conversation is to start from a position of saying, all my team members are important as team members, but they're also important as human beings, and it's important for them to be 100%, to be close to 100%, to be able to function, and therefore, if there is support needed, so instead of looking at it, so if the manager can invite team members to view it not from a perspective of transactionally, this is a problem for me, what does this mean for my log out time, but look at it from a perspective of we are a team. When I need help, I've received help. Now it's time for me to give somebody else the same help. So that's one perspective. The other is to say, again, in most organizations, there is thought given to outages. There are people, that can kind of pitch in. So, there's options of saying, can we get additional resources to handle the crunch? Yeah, but I think, is it fair that people have to pick up the slack for other people? No, but also is it fair that somebody who didn't ask to be affected with to be afflicted either by a mental health issue or a long running physical health issue? Honestly, no. So I would think if you change the lens on that and just look at it differently, and if the managers are able to do the same thing, to say that we're all pulling together, is one way to address it. The other is to honestly, if there is a significant impact, then to look for temporary resources that can come in on a project basis. In large organizations, this is very easily done. Smaller sized organizations, that's a slightly tougher problem to solve, but I think definitely something that can be solved. But I think essentially what I'm saying is that what's needed is a slight mindset shift.
So I guess step one is really to recognize that we would make accommodations for people who would maybe fall physically sick or have other needs. And mental health isn't really very different from that in terms of how we work together. One last question before we wrap up. We're nearing 4:30. A participant asks, some days when I'm extremely low, I can't concentrate on my work. I want to run home and never show up at work again. I need to know how to keep my motivation up while I feel so low. Dr. Sowmya?
This is very common, and it's very, very hard to deal with. And I think this is, again, it goes back to the culture of the team that one is working in. So often if you have a team that feels very supportive, you have somebody to sound off, sometimes just talking through things will enable people to get through the day. Because when you're feeling overwhelmed, you're sat with a colleague who says, actually, this is not important. Why don't you just get through this much and then go home? Might be helpful. But equally, there may be days when you actually want to go and talk to a manager who's able to listen and say, actually, I can't cope at all. And then the manager is able to give them time off. But largely, I think if this is happening far too often, it is about taking a step back and thinking, should I really be doing this? Should I really take a little bit of time off and focus on getting myself better? Is the conversation that's the first thing that they need to do. And then find people who have an ear to listen, give you, to talk about these things at work. It's very hard, though. I can see where people are coming from.
Thank you both very much for being in our webinar. Before we close, I'd like to invite closing comments from both of you. And perhaps if you could share with us, what are 2 simple actions that people in the workplace can take to be allies to people with mental health issues? I'd love to hear that from both of you. Maybe we begin with Monica.
Sure. So the first thing that somebody could do to be an ally is to increase awareness. And one part of it is to read, to understand, to learn, to talk to other people and understand what this means. The other is also to set realistic expectations for oneself, to say that if I'm here to support this person and I'm tracking their progress, that progress might not be linear. It's not going to be like, I have a problem, I go to a therapist, 1 or 2 months later, things get better and it gets better forever. Yeah, to truly get into the shoes of that other person and understand what it means if they say they have an inability to get out of bed in the morning, or what happens if there are fresh uncertainties that turn up on a daily, weekly basis. How does that impact how they are feeling? So get to that level of understanding what's happening with people, so that you're truly able to help them. So that, I would think, is one area of how to be a powerful ally. And the second, I think, is just go back to good old-fashioned just listening and suspending judgment and listening, and not necessarily saying, I wouldn't have done that in their place. Yeah, so I think that is possibly the single largest thing, that if you remove yourself from those shoes and get yourself out of the equation, is I think is a big one.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Dr. Sowmya.
Yeah. Very much agree with you, Monica. I think lack of judgment is a key thing. From a employee perspective, I think one thing as a society, I would say, in a larger perspective, is that we have to be proactive. We know mental health, mental illness can affect anybody. So it's being prepared, just like you'd be prepared for so many other things like malaria and dengue and things like that. Do things to keep yourself well. So don't wait for a crisis to happen. So from an organizational perspective, I would be think about ways of fostering a good team spirit where people are supportive of one another. Think about sensitizing your team to mental illness or any kind of mental health issues. From an employee perspective, again, very much like what you were saying in that people should be less judgmental. So even a frivolous remark may affect somebody quite significantly. Being mindful of what you say, the kind of words you use. And for the people afflicted by problems, there's help out there, be it within the organization or outside the organization. There's always help out there, but it's important to ask.
Thank you. So just to recap, it's about offering safe, non-judgmental spaces and allyship to people who are struggling. And that is very much the philosophy of White Swan Foundation's Workplace Mental Health Program. We believe that the workplace can be a very powerful community of allies and a strong sense of support for people with mental health issues. So thank you all very much for joining in. Special thanks to Monica, to Dr. Sowmya and Tapasya, though she's not here at the moment. We're very glad you could all join us. We will continue to have small and large conversations on mental health at the workplace, on our webinars, on our social media, and on other platforms. So please follow us and to receive updates on it. If you have stories you'd like to share, questions you'd like to ask us, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can write to us at connect@whiteswanfoundation.org. We'll send you a follow-up email so you know how to get in touch with us. And once again, thank you all very much for joining in.
Thank you.
Monica, Dr. Sowmya, and to everybody else who's been with us over the past hour.
Thank you very much.